turning to what's left of their homes, and Israel says they've achieved their main goal, destroying the tunnels used by militants. Plus, our David Mackenzie is one of the few Western reporters to step into the heart of the Ebola outbreak. We'll have his first-hand report on what's going on in a clinic treating patients in Sierra Leone. And later, in a world that could certainly use them, Pope Francis's tips for happiness. All the details right here, right now, at the iDesk.
Live from CNN Center, you're at the International Desk.
The temporary 72-hour ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is now entering its 10th hour, and so far it appears to be holding. With Israeli forces gone, many Gaza residents are coming back in. They're taking advantage of the break in the fighting to leave shelters and go back to what's left of their homes. Earlier, Israel pulled its troops from Gaza. The military says it succeeded in destroying 32 Hamas tunnels. The three-day truce comes after a month of violence, and there are cautious hopes that it could lead to a longer peace. Let's get more now from CNN's Saima Mohsen, who's following the developments from Jerusalem. So, Saima, is this for real this time?
Well, it certainly feels like it. The longest ceasefire that we've witnessed over the last 4 weeks to the day, I might add, since Operation Protective Edge started was 12 hours. So we're on our way, let's say, Relitza, because the last few ceasefires are simply an hour and a half into them. We've seen it breaking down. The crucial difference this time, though, is that both the Palestinians and the on board with this Egyptian initiative, I should say. They're the ones that are helping to broker this peace, this truce of 72 hours. And of course, crucial for the people that have been caught in the crossfire, the people that have been trapped in their homes. The United Nations and UNRWA in particular, which is running 90 shelters across Gaza, say that they, up until yesterday, had 272,000 people in their shelters. Today, that's now gone down. And they say, thankfully, to 267,000 or thereabouts. And that is because people are finally able to get out, go to their homes, survey the damage, and some simply bury their dead. Relitza?
And now with hopes that the two sides will use this truce to sit down at the negotiating table, is Israel sending a delegation to Cairo?
Not quite yet. There's no one on their way, we understand, but there are plans for one. What the Israelis have told us here at the Jerusalem Bureau is that they will be sending a delegation if and when this truce holds. So they're playing a waiting and watching game, so to speak. They're trying to see, should this hold, then they are very much on board with the Egyptian initiative. They are willing to send a delegation for talks. The Palestinians, as we know, also already travelled to Cairo over the weekend for those talks that didn't even happen. So they are both willing to come to the table to talks. Both, of course, have certain conditions. Israel's very clear. Hamas must stop firing rockets in their direction. And they want to see the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip, crucially, as well. Hamas, for its part, wants the blockade to end. Let's not forget that even though for 4 weeks we've been talking about Operation Protective Edge, Gaza is still under a blockade. There are a lot of restrictions on the people there. Simple things like food and water, and now they haven't had electricity for almost a week as well. So the blockade and the operation is simply not helping the situation there for the civilians. So there's a lot to talk about, and there is hope that once this 72-hour ceasefire comes to fruition, we get through it, then they're talking about extending that ceasefire, and it might be days, it might be another week they plan on, but it will be done, hopefully, step by step, if this peace holds. Relitza?
If it holds. Saima Mohsen, live in Jerusalem. Thank you. Well, Gazans are taking advantage of this quiet in the military action to take stock of what's left of their neighborhoods. Gaza Public Works Minister says damage is severe and could cost billions to rebuild. Carl Penhold gives us now a look at the aftermath in one of the hardest hit neighborhoods.
The skies over Gaza are still filled with the sound of Israeli drones, but there's no rockets, no artillery fire. That's the good news. The ceasefire appears to be holding for now at least. But this is the bad. Judge for yourselves. Residents to try and see what is left. You clearly don't need a front door key to come in most of these homes. This is Rad Al Gunfat. He's the owner of this house. And it's just had much of its side blown out. Step into his living room.
When we living in our friends, they say, now you want to go home? I said to him, no, we don't have home. Now our life tragedies is started now.
The border between Gaza and Israel is just a short distance over that way. And when I stood here at the same time on Monday, I could clearly see Israeli tanks close to this neighborhood. Now, though, they've withdrawn along with all the other Israeli troops, according to the Israeli military. That is something that will go down well with Hamas and the other militant factions. They said that the previous truces had been lopsided because they allowed Israeli infantry to remain in place.
In the war, there's no winner. In the war, there's no winner.
Civilian infrastructure has been destroyed across much of the Gaza Strip. Many people have been left without power, others without running water. And if you look at this street, it brings into perspective, where do you start? First of all, people have got to clear out the rubble. That's if they can find a truck to drag it away in. And then you've got to look at these buildings. Many of them have been made unsafe by the fighting. They'll need to be demolished. And only when all that is clear, when the area is rebuilt, well, then you can think about putting up things like power lines. But it's a process that, even according to the United Nations, could take up to 30 years. Carl Penhall, CNN, Gaza.
Well, there are hopes now that this 72-hour truce could be the beginning of the end, at least of these current hostilities. CNN's Reza Sayah is in Egypt, where the government is hoping Israel will sign on to those peace talks. We'll send a delegation. Reza is now joining us from Cairo. So, Reza, how different is it this time?
Well, I think if you look at the other ceasefire plans, I think a lot of observers say this time it's working so far because, one, there's no conditions attached to this particular ceasefire plan. You'll recall on Friday, it was the conditions that seemingly made everyone confused. Israel was under the impression they could continue to destroy tunnels on Palestinian territory in Gaza. The Hamas leaders had a different understanding. Next thing you know, the fighting has started and more than 100 people have died. This time with this particular cease plan, there are no conditions, and that is perhaps why so far it has held. The big question now, the big mystery now, when does the Israeli delegation arrive? We know the Palestinian delegation is here. This is the same that arrived over the weekend representing Hamas, the Fatah movement, Islamic Jihad. They're the ones who, along with Egyptian government officials, crafted this ceasefire plan. And in turn, the Egyptian government conveyed the plan to the Israelis. Israelis eventually said yes. The Israelis have made it clear that they're going to make their way here to Cairo once they believe that this ceasefire is going to hold. Again, in the past, we've had similar scenarios. They've fallen apart. But this time, here in Cairo, you get the sense that things are different, that both sides are taking this matter seriously, and this is a real opportunity to craft some sort of lasting truce. Of course, we've seen that scenario happen before when both sides have gotten to the table. They've laid out their conditions, but the problem is they haven't backed down from their conditions. The Israelis, of course, want to disarm Hamas. They want to demilitarize Gaza. Hamas says that's a non-starter. Hamas, in turn, has demanded for Israel to lift the economic blockade, open the border crossings, and they continue to say, we want just a semblance of a dignified life, something they say they haven't had, Walitza. So all of that is going to be on the table once the Israelis arrive here in Cairo and much of the region, in fact, much of the world, waiting to see if and when that happens.
Now, with so much at stake, Egypt's role here is so important. However, Egypt's president, El-Sisi, has a very strained relationship with Hamas, if at all.
Yeah, that's true. And that's perhaps why it took a while for Egypt to play an effective role as mediator. You'll recall they had a chance on July 14th. Egypt put out an initial proposal. It was immediately rejected by Hamas. Hamas complained that Egypt had not consulted with them, that Egypt had included all of Israel's demand, but none of Hamas's demands. And this, many observers believe, was an outcome of General Sisi, the current president's animosity towards Hamas. Remember, when he overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood President Mohammed Morsi last year, shortly thereafter, he declared Hamas a terrorist organization, as well as the Muslim Brotherhood. That certainly didn't help the dynamics between Cairo and Hamas. But this time, clearly, Cairo, the Egyptian government, is communicating with Hamas, discussing some of their conditions, and that is perhaps why we're deep into this ceasefire with no fighting. A lot of hopeful that that will. A lot of people hopeful that that's going to continue.
Very, very hopeful there that really that will continue. Reza Sayah, live in Cairo. Thank you very much. Well, the first Muslim in the British cabinet is stepping down in protest over the conflict in Gaza. Saida Warsi tweeted, quote, "With deep regret, I have this morning written to the Prime Minister and tendered my resignation. I can no longer support government policy on Gaza." Warsi called Britain's approach sensible. The opposition has criticized Prime Minister David Cameron for not going far enough in condemning Israel's actions. There were some tense moments in the skies over Manchester, England in the last hour. That's where an inbound Qatar Airways plane was escorted to the ground by an RAF fighter jet. At the time, Manchester Airport said it was treating the incident as a full emergency. The pilot was told there was a possible suspicious device aboard. The plane has since landed safely. A male passenger was arrested on suspicion of making a hoax bomb threat. The epicenter for Ebola in Sierra Leone is in its easternmost province, far from the capital, Freetown. We will show you what it's like in there in a live report. Plus, Typhoon Halong has spared the Philippines. We'll see where it's headed next. All of that and more right here at the International Desk.
Make, Create, Innovate in association with the European Patent Office, supporting innovation, competitiveness and economic growth.
Imagine the dreaded scenario. Explosions. A fire in a nuclear power plant or an oil refinery. How to put out the blaze quickly and safely. Well, here in Croatia, they think they found a heavyweight solution.
We entered the new armored firefighting remote control robotic vehicles.
A gripper on the front to remove radioactive material or punch through walls. A thermal shield with special paint. It can handle up to 1500 degrees Celsius. And with 7 cameras, it can be sent into a fire and maneuvered from over a kilometre away.
This month on Inside the Middle East, a vibrant journey of discovery to the cultural heart of the region. Meet the innovators and creators pushing boundaries from Istanbul to Cairo. And those breathing new life into ancient traditions. Join me, Becky Anderson, for a look at the changing cultural landscape. That's Inside the Middle East.
Wednesday on CNN. In association with Qatar Foundation. This month on Living Golf, a pilgrimage to some of the best links courses in Scotland. We go back to where the game began. Those who know their history.
Nick Faldo had played so many different kinds of shots. He was an artist.
Those who've made history.
He's got to work it out what club will hit it on that trajectory consistently.
And those who want to be a part of it.
Hopefully I can have